Well, good evening, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here after a bit of a break, and extremely glad to have our guests here this evening. The subject is one of the most interesting subjects in terms of Jewish studies today. How many Jews are there in the world? Well, the general idea is there are 15 million. However, according to the state of Israel, the number of people apart from this 15 million who want to be Jews, who think that they're Jews, who aspire to be Jews, is something like 200 million. And so there's a big gap. And this is a very significant number of people. And what the state of Israel does with this and what the Jewish community throughout the world does with this is of some very considerable importance, both for Jews and for this other Jewish population. So our two guests this evening have played a very critical role in addressing this particular issue. On the one hand, of these 200 million people, the process that's led them to thinking they're Jewish or wanting to be Jewish really arises, for the most part, out of certain tensions, I would say, within Christianity, and a sense that Christianity is not nearly as logical as it could be and not nearly as logical as Judaism. This seems to be the main driver of this change of religious affiliation. But there are other reasons as well, and in many of the cases, people have tried to connect with members of the Jewish population of the world, and when they reach out to the Jewish population of the world, the people that they usually reach out to are sitting here today. So they really are the kind of interface between seekers and, if you like, answers and help. I know them very well, our speakers, because we've traveled together in some pretty remote parts of the world, most dramatically in Papua New Guinea, and only a little bit less dramatically in Nicaragua, and most recently in Abidjan, not to mention a few years ago, Madagascar. So it's been fascinating for me as a scholar to see what our two rabbis have done on the ground. Gerald is the chair of the board of the Union of Traditional Judaism. He was ordained in 1979 by the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, and since 1987, he's been the rabbi of Temple Emmanuel in Staten Island. And Bonita is the volunteer president of Kulanu. This is an organization with which I have been involved in some way or another since, I think, the 1980s. And Kulanu, which of course in Hebrew means all of us, is an organization which in a way is really kind of looking at the Holocaust in a somewhat different way, perhaps, than other parts of the Jewish community, in the sense that they see a loss that can be replenished. And so there's this idea of Jewish loss on the one hand and replenishment on the other. And it does seem remarkable, does it not, that only, 70 years ago, Jews were being slaughtered. Nobody in their right mind would have volunteered to be Jewish or would have wanted to be Jewish. And now, just 70 years on, we have these 200 million people throughout the world who actively want to be Jewish and are trying to do something about it. This is the kind of background, as I said, to start with. It seems to me this is one of the most dynamic areas of Jewish studies, which is what I do, and also of Jewish activism, which is what they do. So before Bonita speaks to us, we're going to have a short film explaining what the Kulanu organization does.
Thank you so much, Professor Parfit and FIU Museum. Yes. I was going to thank everyone, especially Nancy and Professor Parfit for inviting us to present at the museum. And it was Professor Parfit who taught me how to link academic study with activism. And I want to thank him for that. And this is just a few-minute video to show you exactly what Professor was talking about. This phenomena of emerging Jewish communities is all over the world, Kulanus in 33 countries. So.
Isolated, emerging, and returning Jewish communities around the globe. But how exactly do we do this? In many different and specific ways.
How have we been able to achieve so much since our founding in 1994?
By immersing ourselves
together with our partner communities.
Partners. It takes partners.
By connecting and enlisting other like-minded organizations to join our efforts. And through the strength of our team.
Our volunteers.
And those who around the world support this incredibly important work.
As the word Kulanu in Hebrew means all of us.
All of us.
All of us.
It's all of us.
It truly is up to all of us
to lift up our brothers and sisters in remote communities who yearn for their heritage, but where being Jewish is even more challenging or forgotten.
It is about wanting to change their lives fundamentally and take on a new system of life and a new system of belief and a new system of practice. And they are passionate about it.
Today's world allows even more ways to connect, to respond to those who seek our help to strengthen their Jewish identity.
And when Jews connect, whether in person or virtually, all our lives are enriched, and the Jewish people are strengthened.
Together we are stronger.
Stronger, united through our faith.
I was searching and seeking, and I have tried many religions, and I was never satisfied. And finally, have seen that Judaism is the ideal religion.
Kulanu reaches communities by assisting with Shabbat and prayer services and the celebration of Jewish holidays.
By presenting communities with our first Torah.
With teachers, through conversions and Jewish weddings.
By providing Jewish ritual items.
Through education, advocacy, and community development. In these important ways, we are able to engage, include,
and lift up our Jewish communities in all corners of the world.
Kulanu continues to travel the world, where and when possible, to assist Jewish communities who are rediscovering their roots or have chosen Judaism.
We provide books and ritual items to support Shabbat and prayer services and the celebration of Jewish holidays. And it's an incredibly rewarding give and take.
Simultaneously learning and being exposed to the unique ways communities have fused their local culture with Jewish traditions.
When Kulanu facilitates the gifting of a Torah, the long line from Moses on Mount Sinai extends further through today and across the world. The communities celebrate the cornerstone of their laws and traditions and their unification with Jews around the world through the words of Torah.
We are so excited to be able to donate this Torah to the Comunidad Sefardita Ortodoxa de Honduras, which is in San Pedro Sula in Honduras.
We celebrate today as Klal Yisrael, Michael, Jeannie bringing us together, and we have with us the honorable consuls from Honduras, as well as representation of the consul from Israel. And we have Senor Gonzalez, who's here on behalf of the community of Honduras, which is embracing Torah. May Hashem bless you and your Kehillah.
As a catalyst to connection, Kulanu fosters online learning through the giving of computers and smartphones and the underwriting of internet service provided through Kulanu's Technology Fund.
This support allows communities to engage with teachers and other communities to further their Jewish education.
To nurture Jewish teachings and traditions, Kulanu also sends in-person teachers overseas.
While also arranging for leaders of partner communities to travel to the U.S. and Israel to study.
They bring back to their local communities and enhance knowledge and new relationships.
Nothing is more spiritually fulfilling than when Kulanu arranges rabbis to perform local conversions when requested.
Soy una de las 114 personas que hicieron conversión en Nicaragua y actualmente soy el presidente de la comunidad judía sefardí. Lógicamente, venimos de familias que fueron forzadas a no guardar la Torá.
I have the best job because I see the looks on these ladies' faces when they come out of the mikvah. That's the best job.
These are often followed with the renewing of vows through Jewish weddings in the community.
Bonds are strengthened, the links through the generations enhanced, and the celebrations are tremendous, overflowing with joy.
While connecting through the internet opens eyes wide, holding ritual items in their own hands brings Judaism further into homes in a tangible way. With gifts of mezuzot on doorposts,
Shabbat candles on tables,
prayer books in hands,
kippot on heads,
talit and tefillin,
shofars and glowing menorahs,
Judaism burns ever brighter. Kulanu also often assists communities with education, nutrition, economic development, and infrastructure. Efforts, Kulanu continues our work through the generous support of donors and the dedication of staff, volunteers, and community leaders around the world.
Together, with all of us,
we will continue to engage,
inspire,
and unite
isolated, returning, and emerging Jewish communities around the globe for years to come.
Thank you, Kulanu.
I hope some of this information was new to some of you, right? It's really encompassing, and I always say, seeing is believing, and you could watch video after video, and unless you go and see it with your own eyes, you cannot believe what's going on around the world. Okay, I'm supposed to talk like this. Okay, so what I said is that seeing is believing, and watching video after video is not going to get you to the spot of fully understanding what this global phenomena is. And the name of this presentation tonight was, Will Judaism Become a Major Religion in Africa? And to that regard, I want to give my husband the microphone so he can talk about that question specifically. And at the end of his presentation, I will present a survey that we recently took, December 2022, of 9 countries and where they're at Jewishly. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. If the microphone's not right, tell me. Well, it's a pleasure for me to be here. This is such a wonderful place where I've met such wonderful people. And it's also wonderful that Professor Parfit is here because he's been our kind of mentor and showing us the way in so many areas. Well, to begin, I think that Judaism is beginning to become a world religion again, as it was in Second Temple times, and it was on everybody's horizon. But not to go into that subject, because we're talking about Africa. And the question is, does Judaism stand a chance of becoming a major religion in Africa? Well, I think it does, and I'll tell you why. First of all, you have to realize that Africa is a religious place. It's not secularized like most of the United States and Europe. I remember talking to a neighbor of mine, a Methodist minister from Ghana, who said, oh, you'll like it there because in West Africa, at least, finding some personal religious truth and religious path is an important part of everyone's life journey. Well, compare that to here. It's an important part of some people's life journey, but for many others, it's something that they don't even think of. What I would begin by saying is that for African people, for many African people, Judaism seems familiar to them. In a sense, more in line with their original culture than Christianity. One, if you look at the Torah, the basic unit of society is the tribe, as it is in Africa. I recall speaking with Rabbi Suzomu, who's the rabbi in Uganda, and we talked about racism in Africa. And he says, well, it's not exactly what you would call racism because we hardly ever come across white people. They're kind of curiosities more than anything else. But there's the idea of tribe and helping your own tribe and not helping the others, and religion that divides African society. So tribe, that's a very important thing in African culture. Also, if you look at the Torah and Jewish life, which is derived from the Torah, it's very much attuned to the cycles of nature. What are our festivals? Well, 3 of the most important ones are harvest festivals. And in Africa, many groups celebrate harvest festivals. I was reading recently about the yam festivals of the Akan people in Ghana. And again, for someone like that, reading about it in the Torah reminds them of their own original culture and heritage. Also, Judaism, like traditional African society, fosters and encourages group consciousness, group solidarity, rather than concentrating on the individual. Well, I don't want to get into the whole issue of my religion is better than your religion, but I think people in Africa find the theology of Judaism attractive. in that there are no intermediaries between God and human beings, that each of us have direct access to God, direct access to God. Judaism is more earthy and less ethereal and underworld and otherworldly than Christianity. Also in Africa, many, though not all ethnic groups, find striking resemblance to their own original customs and those of Judaism. Many groups practice circumcision. Some, such as the Igbo, and Igbo's not the only one, on the 8th day. That's a striking similarity if it's genuine. I recall being in Madagascar and hearing stories about taboos, which are called fadas, which are observed by different circles in different regions and so forth. And I was told that one of the taboos of the royal family and their circles back in the pre-colonial days was not to work on Shabbat and also not to eat pork. And I was quoted a legend which said, yeah, it said someplace that someone brought pork up to the royal mountain and it caused an earthquake. Well, those remind me of things. Also, many peoples in Africa practice menstrual seclusion. And, well, not only in Africa, but so hearing of those practices in Judaism would feel comfortable to many Africans and draw them. So we have a couple of results. I'll talk a little bit later about Judaism, but one of them, which is actually a larger phenomenon than Judaism, are Old Testament churches, which emphasize Hebrew scripture, and that Jesus wasn't the Messiah through whom the sins of the world are forgiven, but a prophet. And then we also have the Messianics, who tried to combine Judaism with Christianity. I was asked, we were in Abidjan, and we left the first day of Hanukkah to visit a Messianic church. So there I was. The pastor was dressed in Hasidic style with a beard, a black suit, white shirt, a hat, and tzitzit that showed from his pants. And they told me that they buy kosher meat. There's someone who actually lives, an Israeli who lives actually a couple hundred miles away, who comes to Abidjan every few months and slaughters chickens and so forth. And they buy meat from him only. And to my surprise, he also told me that the people in his community practice Taharat HaMishpacha, the laws of the mikveh, and they immerse themselves in the river or the bay, whatever it was. And so I asked them about Jesus. So I said, well, and they weren't very not clear about explaining the role of Jesus in their life and in their community. So Messianics, that's one. Well, many of the groups that practice Judaism and some that don't point to Jewish ancestry. The Igbo of Nigeria, and there are at least 30 million of them, twice, according to many statistics, the number of Jews in the world, point to their ancestral figure called Ari. And who is Ari? They say, well, if you go to synagogue, regularly, and you read the Torah reading, there are sections of genealogies. There was one that was read not many weeks ago, the grandchildren of Jacob and the sons of God, the tribe God, were Ari and Arodi and Areli and a whole bunch more. So they say, well, you know, that Ari was our ancestor, and we, therefore, are Israelites. So that's how they put it in Igbo thinking. There's different versions of Ari. Some, he's the son of God, their ancestor. In others, he's a mystical figure who came from heaven and taught them everything they know. Then we have another group in Africa, the Lemba. Well, the Lemba are not as numerous as the Igbo for sure, but they're depending on the estimates, and they live mostly in South Africa and Zimbabwe. I've heard 50,000 or double that or more than that or whatever. But their tradition is that their ancestors were 7 white men that came from Yemen in remote times. And Dr. Parfit did a lot of basic research on them and encountered them and so forth. Really, probably the first outsider who took them seriously. And they have some Jewish customs. Well, they sanctify the new moon. They only eat meat that's slaughtered in a manner that's similar to what we would call kosher, slaughtered by a circumcised lemba. And they were known at one time of not eating in other people's houses because the dishes weren't kosher. And there were genetic studies which showed that they had their clan of religious leaders, the Bubal clan, had the Kohen haplotype, and which might mean that they're descended from Aaron, the high priest. And until recently, no one took them at all seriously, but they consider themselves Jews. And some of them really want to join, or most of them want to join and be part of the larger Jewish community. There is a group, which Kulanu assisted a lot, that practices Judaism as we know it. They're centered in the main city of Zimbabwe, Harare. And then there are others who more want to stick to the Lemba tradition. But is their story reasonable? Well, perhaps it is. And one of the things that I think is another story, the story of the Jews of Tanzania. Why? They came from Yemen also, but within living memory. Grandparents, great-grandparents came from Yemen. So the people today who are middle-aged either knew people who came or heard the stories or memories recounted about them. And they follow most of the Yemenite customs and way of life. So if they came from a Jewish community in more recent times, well, possibly some of the other groups that claim Jewish ancestry might somehow have arrived there in more remote times and kept up memories and certain customs. And there are different, let's say, guesses for that. There are some people who say, well, some of them were influenced by Spanish Portuguese Jews who came in the 1600s as business people, 1500s. And then when the Inquisition was on their trail, went into the interior and mixed with the natives. That's one theory, but none of these theories are really proven. Or then we have another interesting kind of puzzle, the city of Timbuktu in what's now Mali. Well, it's known that there was a Jewish community there, and people have actually discovered in Timbuktu whole trunkloads of legal documents and other things in Hebrew. And they even had, before their became a whole thing about Muslim fundamentalists, a kind of a society or a club of people who were of Jewish heritage and background, though they were quite happy with being Muslims at the present time. So again, we have a way that Judaism fits in with African culture. We also have African groups that have in their heritage practices which are similar to some extent with Jewish practices. Well, there's another reason I think why Judaism appeals to people in Africa. That is, Judaism, or choosing Judaism, is a mark of revolt against colonialism and neo-colonialism. And choosing Judaism is an assertion of liberty in places where many people believe Christianity was forced on them. I'll give you an example. A woman by the name of Alicia, who actually was in that opening film in Madagascar. Well, she told us that, isn't it interesting that the date of her conversion was the same date that the French deposed the last queen, the last native, so to speak, ruler of Madagascar. So she looked at her engagement and conversion to Judaism as an act of liberty and free choice, a protest against a faith which she felt was forced upon her and her countrymen. Well, for Africans also, there's Israel. For the Africans I've met, Israel is not the white colonial settler state, but an example of liberation. If, I've heard it said more than once, if the Jews who were so persecuted can find themselves and reassert themselves and reestablish their nationhood and their culture, so can we. Now, what kind of Judaism do they have there? Basically, what I've seen, and Ethiopia would be somewhat different, rabbinic Judaism. Most of the people that I've met lived as fully observant Jews, observing Shabbat and practicing kashrut, even if they have to be vegetarians. Well, they have full prayer services in Hebrew and English, and Hebrew, English, and French, depending on where it was. Over a year ago, I visited Nigeria, and we were in a conservative synagogue, and the women they had separate seating. The women all covered their hair, and also most of the people knew what every word in the Hebrew prayer book meant. A lot more than I can say for many of the Jews I know back home. Well, in Africa, people are not, again, not secularized, not full of doubts about Jewish teaching. Not full of all these kinds of things. They also, again, have a different idea of what truth is here than we do here. In the United States, we have a relativistic idea. You're right, and you're right, and you're right too. And that's great. And we'll all be friends. In Africa, I found that people feel, well, it's either true or false. And Judaism is true. Therefore, faiths and claims contrary to Judaism are false. Again, I could see a lot of people say, well, are they really Jews and so forth? And maybe they're not. And I could see an African speaking to an American or maybe even to an Israeli Jew asking, do you keep Shabbos? Well, not really. Do you keep kosher? The separation of menstruating women. What's that? Never heard of that before. And the African answering that Jew and saying, are you really Jewish? Maybe not. Well, the issue is, who is a Jew? And there are various definitions. Some would say a Jew is anyone who says they're a Jew. Others would say a Jew is someone who observes Jewish life cycles and holiday cycles. Then there's the halachic definition that a Jew is anyone born of a Jewish mother. Well, matrilineal. Jews are not the only matrilineal ethnic group in the world. Many of the Native American groups are as well. So then we have one more issue, and that has to do with the last definition. Most of the African Jews who practice Judaism have the idea that descent is determined patrilineally. And they say that that's even in the Bible. So therefore, in order to be fully accepted by the religious part of the Jewish world, which is where they want to be accepted and where they belong, they would need some kind of a conversion. Most are actually willing and even eager, but there are some who regard it as an insult. In any case, the logistics and the practicality of it are quite difficult. Well, I think Africa as a place, as a continent, is rising in many ways. Will it become a major Jewish community? I think it certainly has the potential of being not only a major Jewish community, but a place where our future leaders and scholars come from. I can't predict the future. The future is up to them. Thank you.
I feel that we should really have a few questions to process all that information just for a few minutes, and then I'll give you some results of a survey that we recently took. Are there any comments or anything or questions that, yes? I have that in my survey. That's the next part. Okay. Other questions?
Yeah.
Comments, anything that was new that you didn't know before? Okay. Debbie, you have a question?
Well, maybe you could repeat the question with the microphone.
Yeah, I don't think we heard you so well.
Is there going to be any more trips? Okay.
Okay, thank you. My question was, I heard you say something about like traders coming in. Were they Jewish traders? Like I always wondered, how did they come in? And also, was it the lost tribes? Did you said something about that? Were these the lost tribes?
Okay, the question is, were these the lost tribes?
Are these,
okay. Are these the lost tribes? Okay. So there's even a debate in Chazal, with the sages, of will the lost tribes be found? And some say yes, and some say no. And is there a way to prove that this was a lost tribe? According to Professor Parfit, it's very difficult to prove. However, if someone were to question your being Jewish, you're very sure that you're Jewish, right? Could you prove it back 1,000 years where you came from? And so the Africans who believe that they're descendants of lost tribes are just as convinced of their Jewishness or their Jewish tribal connection as we're convinced that we're Jews. So this is a very, this is one of those questions that is like a multifaceted crystal, that there's different phases and pieces to it. And there's lots written on lost tribes. Those who think they're from the lost tribes really believe they're from the lost tribes.
Anti-Semitism, do they face anti-Semitism?
It depends where.
Jewish there.
Okay, it depends where and what. Some don't. I would say in our travels, we encountered people who felt their families reject them. This is a generalized principle because Judaism is black magic. It's a hated faith. There is that kind of family pushing rejection. Is there anti-Semitism? It depends where. A lot of these countries are really open to other religions. That's why religion is flourishing there. You have all the major churches. Everybody's in the act of religious development now in Africa and Latin America, right? So the Jews are doing it too. We're part of that bigger picture of religious development in Africa, yeah?
Not all the groups claim Jewish descent. For example, the people in Cameroon, which was the first group in Africa that we visited, were originally Christians. They were Catholics, and then they became evangelicals, and then they studied the scripture because that's what they were told to do. And they came to the conclusion, based on that, that Judaism is the true religion. They had been fully practicing Judaism for a while when Bonnie and I came to visit, and we were the first non-virtual Jews they had ever seen.
And we just had a conference where Professor came with us in Cote d'Ivoire in the Ivory Coast, and we had 9 countries there. And one of the keynote speakers, he was an evangelical bishop that had thousands of people. He was internationally known, and he lost his whole community because he said, oh no, I believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and left Jesus way behind. And so he now has a small community, maybe 120 people in Cameroon, but he lost his money, he lost his stature, he lost his everything. And the question of anti-Semitism is kind of interesting. In Indonesia, there's this fabulous group, and they set up the first Holocaust museum in Indonesia, and the Muslims are complaining. But the fact that Indonesia lets them set up the museum means that the community is open. So you're gonna find, depending where, what the anti-Semitic thing is. And another thing you should know is a lot of these communities are heavy, knee-deep in interfaith dialogue with the members around them. So that's another piece. I want to get a little bit to this survey. Yes.
So we do have one question from Lorna Hopp, who asks, are there going to be any more trips?
Well, that's so interesting because we think there are going to be 2 trips. You need to go to the Kulanu website, kulanu.org, where we will be posting, I think there'll be a trip to Ethiopia and one to Uganda in the next few months. We're not sure how we're partnering with these groups that we know are planning trips, but there are some kind of trips. If anyone's interested, please, like I say, kulanu.org. There are 3 different kinds of Kulanus. Any other questions there that I can't read? Hannah, you had a question? Okay, the question was, what's their attitude towards Israel as it relates to emerging communities? Well, like I said, there's more Israeli flags that we see in some of these communities than I do on Staten Island. And the fact is, there is this affinity towards Israel. Listen, in Africa, basically, they understand rigorous religious practice. And they understand biblical, reading the Bible and getting to it, and that kind of fulfillment of prophecies, that whole religious mentality about prophetic fulfillment and messianic wishes. And a lot of them see Israel in that kind of prophetic message. Does that answer? Yeah. Oh, they sing Hatikva, they sing Israeli songs. Oh, and those that can get visas travel back and forth. That's a big issue. They can't get visas. They can't get visas to come to America, and they can't get visas to go to Israel. We try to set them up in yeshivas when they want. We try all kinds of things, but it's been a very big challenge to get them visas. So I'd like to do a little bit. I don't want to run over an hour. Yeah. One more question? Sure.
I want to know if there were any crypto Jewish communities that you're finding there, like we're finding in Central and South America.
Oh, that's such a great question. And I think Professor Parfit and the other academics should study it. There is this new thing that I'm coming across as crypto Jews, a new crypto Jewish community expanding the notion of what we used to call Marranos. We have the Gadams in Ethiopia, outside practicing Christians, inside practicing Jews. I just heard of 40 families in Somalia, crypto hidden, but practice some form of Judaism. I had contacts a while ago in Kurdistan, Iraq. They're practicing Muslims and they still light Shabbos candles. There's all this crypto Jewish phenomena that's now in the last 2 years being brought to my attention from all over besides Latin America. And on the Kulanu board, we have Rabbi Barbara Aiello, who's a Reform rabbi who has started a community in Southern Calabria, I think, Italy. And her community is crypto Jews that are coming back. Okay, that's it. We're going to start this other technological wizard. Oh, wow. I can't believe how well this works. Okay, and I turn it back this way. Okay. So we set up, and it was really a dream of mine and Rabbi Ari Greenspan to bring all these Africans together to one place. They're very isolated. The Jews of Ghana never met the Jews of Cameroon, who never met the Jews of Ethiopia, who never met the Jews of Nigeria. And Nigeria has, we know of 82 communities, and there might be close to 200, and they're all young people. And even the ones in Nigeria, they live far apart from each other, so they never met. So we brought them, Kulanu did a lot of fundraising, and we brought them at great expense for airfare to Cote d'Ivoire for a week to celebrate together. And we didn't, Kulanu is basically a mom and pop type of boutique, not-for-profit. It's sort of small, but now we're beginning to explode, and we need to do things much more on a professional level. Now we have staff. When I started 15 years ago, it was only volunteers. So I said, well, we need some data. And we put together, I don't want to talk so much about the Sub-Saharan African community. We had no data. And I put together with some data people and my own opinion and some stuff. So here's what we found. And I put this together this afternoon, so I'm sure professionals would have done it much more beautifully, but it gets the point with what I want to get across. Okay. Okay, well, I'm pressing the next one and it's not moving ahead. Wait, does it go down? No. I have to press, okay. So there were 38 respondents from 9 countries. Oh, what was really interesting about this survey, and when we created the survey, we weren't aware. Some people never took a survey, didn't know what that was, didn't know how to write in English, didn't know how to use the computer. We took along our grandson to this trip and he helped people fill out the survey. Okay. These are the countries. Oh, I don't know how to go back. Oh, Madagascar, Uganda, Cote d'Ivoire. Uganda's written there twice. Nigeria, Cameroon, Ghana, Tanzania, Ethiopia. 63% received some sort of Kulanu funding. 53% study with rabbis outside of their community from once a week to daily. 42% have a Torah. Now, if you're a halakhic Jew looking at it from some halakhic point of view, these are communities that have basically not converted. So they have a Torah, they read from the Torah, they make the brachas on the Torah. Okay, 65% bake their own matzah. 43% converted. 62% want to convert. 57% identify as Orthodox. 19% identify as conservative. 3% identify as Reform. 11% identify as Hasidic. 7% identify as Kabbalistic. The remainder identify as others, and some are Ethiopians with other kinds of community names that they, and a lot of them talk about creating a Judaism that's non-denominational. And the denominational thing in America is sort of poisonous. Like I always say, it's different groups competing for the same money for their institutions. And so, you know, Africa doesn't need that kind of headache. Okay. 51% identify as Sephardi. And in Madagascar, I asked them, are you Sephardi or Ashkenazi? And they said, we don't look like Europeans. Of course we're Sephardi. Okay. Okay, wait. That's the next one. 86% report to not identify as Ashkenazi. 12.5% identify as Mizrahi. Membership sizes range from 40 to 500 plus. In this, of the, you know, like 30 something people we surveyed. But that doesn't represent everybody. We try to get like 2 people from each community basically to come. In Nigeria, we had more. 78% report their synagogue has a board that makes decisions. 60% conduct daily prayers. 95% conduct Friday night services. 32% have a mikveh. Of those that have a mikveh, 46% use natural water. 46% have regular children's classes. In more than half of the communities, 1 in 4 people are employed. Mostly unemployed, though there were some wealthy people that we encountered. In our first trip to Cote d'Ivoire, we stayed in homes with marble floors, and the guy picked us up in a Peugeot, and I said, oh, this is Miami Beach. It was sort of like that kind of splendor that you could see in a fancy Miami Beach home. 82% report they have enough food. Okay, and this is a picture over there that at the conference, communities all over America donate us used talaisim and kippot and everything, and we brought some there. And the funny question is that there are Messianic Christians that put a lot of money into developing a Judaistic looking Christianity. And they give them healthcare, and they give them food, and they give them jobs, and we give them used yarmulkes and used sidurim and used talaisim, and we give them used, you know, so it's kind of a funny thing. I hope for the future things will change, but in general, they're used to use things. And like they said to me, in America, you get first grade Chinese quality stuff. We get third grade Chinese quality stuff. So yes, you have a question.
settlements, and there are Jews living in these Caucasian settlements. Are the synagogues integrated?
Say that question, say the beginning.
Are the synagogues integrated in the major cities where there are white Jews and black Jews?
Okay, that's a big question. So in Africa, the Rabbanut in South Africa has a rabbi, Rabbi Silverhat. We met him, he's lovely. But he's in charge of what we would call the white or the European shuls that are left, like in Zimbabwe, there's the Sephardi and Ashkenazi one. The truth is, what he claims to me is that the South African Rabbanut doesn't have the funds to protect all of these people should we accept them. And part of his role is to get police protection on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and to maintain their cemeteries and do kinds of things like that, which is very costly. So his claim is it's not racism, it's not racism, it's not racism, it's just we don't have the funds to do the kind of acceptance of the Lemba or the kind of acceptance of, I don't know, some other group that has, I think in Rwanda there's some white, oh, I know in Kenya there's the one in Nairobi. So the rabbi of the Nairobi shul came to our conference in Cote d'Ivoire. And, you know, I want to say my dream is to have, when the shuls empty out in Zimbabwe, they have no choice but to give it to the Lemba. You know, at some point, these places are either going to get overgrown with grass and have leaks in the roof, or they decide to get with the program. And eventually it becomes their choice. Is there some other questions? Oh, my husband gave me a note. So what was one of the accomplishments that we did at this conference in Cote d'Ivoire? We set up a Sub-Saharan African Jewish Alliance. And and they have a constitution and they elected a president and a board. And the goal is for them to advocate for themselves in the Rabbanut in Israel to the Jewish Agency, because this whole issue of a group like Kulanu, who are American Jews who really have very kind hearts and want to help in Africa, really shouldn't be their spokespeople. So the goal of SAJA, the Sub-Saharan African and Jewish Alliance, which is relatively new, has already had one success. They had Innovation Africa contact some of the leaders where Innovation Africa has economic development projects, and we'll work with Jewish communities there. They're setting up a domestic violence work group. They're setting up a work group to tackle visas, to tackle conversions, to tackle all sorts of problems that they share. And I had an aha moment about 2 or 3 years ago. My husband's a pulpit rabbi for 40 years, a community rabbi, right? I know what he struggles with. He struggles with who pays for the kiddushes, how do I get people to Jewish education, how do you find matches for people who are looking for each other, how do you do, and that's exactly what they're doing. How to educate their children, how to attract new members. So we may be doing it on the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they're doing it on a couple of hundred here and a couple of hundred there. But the truth is, it's the same deal. Establishing a Jewish community is establishing a Jewish community. And just like communities here close up and they merge and they this and they that, so is it in Africa. In Ghana, they had a bunch of iterations already. They're now into 4 groups. Madagascar, there's 3 groups, and one fights with the other, you know, the shul I don't go to and the shul I do go to. And so the same kind of interpolitical stuff that goes on in churches and that goes on in synagogues are also all over Africa. Is there any other questions?
There are no questions, but lots of thank yous.
Oh, and in the
Everybody.
chat there's no questions more. Anybody else with the questions? No. Okay. Oh, Debbie.
that you stayed in a, thank you, in a home like with marble floors. Are most of the communities that you go to poor? Like I think
Yes,
you said
okay.
1 out of 4
Yes, that's the.
was employed, right?
Most of the places we go to, we are in huts or without electricity or shoddy electricity. In Cameroon, the joke was the only running water was women with pitchers on their head that would run with the pitchers of water on their head. They don't have running water, they have outhouses. Once in a while, we get offered a mosquito net. Though we have more mosquitoes on Staten Island than I saw combined all over Africa, though I know Professor Parfit has had a different experience with mosquitoes. Most of them are very poor. I will say most of them are very poor, but my point was some are not. And we had 2 people that came to our conference and I called them the classy ones. They were dressed classy. So, and they don't have trouble with visas and they can travel wherever they want and they can afford their airfare to Europe or wherever they, so there is this piece where Kulanu had started, over 25 years ago and basically dealing with Uganda and Ethiopia, very poor people. Kulanu now became the hub for these kind of emerging, returning and isolated Jewish communities. And I haven't talked much about Latin America or a place like Suriname or the Caribbean because this topic was Africa, but this is all over the world. Groups of people claiming Jewish origin. I know in Poland, it's all over the place. My great-grandfather, my great-great, I know, I saw a grave, I did. And they're coming back to, look, the question all over the world is, who am I really, right? People are taking genetic tests. Who am I really? And that's the big question. Who am I really that people are trying to grapple with? And I think that is an overlay across the planet on people seeking their own identity and who are they really. And so I think that plays a piece here too. I guess we can conclude if there's no other, yes, oh, you have a hand up, yeah? One more from Reggie.
I know that in some cases, for example, the Ethiopian Jews, Israel, there were those in the rabbinate who did not want to accept him because they thought this was a ticket to come to Israel for the right of return. How much do you see that as an issue among these groups?
So what I want to say about Israel and acceptance of these groups is that what complicates it is that immigration is tied to being Jewish. Where in America, immigration is immigration, doesn't matter what religion you are. In Israel, immigration is tied to your religion. So the more you say, oh, you're Jewish, you're Jewish, you're Jewish, you're Jewish, the more immigration you got to deal with. So part of it is that. Is there movement? Is there a political movement? I see there is. The Israeli government within the last year, it must be maybe 8 months ago, had participated in a conference called Affinity Groups. And they were looking into, okay, what are the affinity groups that love Israel here? Look, we know a lot of anti-Semitism. What about the Philo-Semites that are out there, the ones who love us, right? And there were different circles they made, 3 different circles of affinity groups. The inner one is the intermarrieds, and the ones with a Jewish grandparent or a Jewish parent, that's the first circle. The second circle they considered like the B'nai Anusim, the crypto Jews. And the third circle were like these emerging communities in Africa, Latin America, who may or may not be able to prove some Jewish connection, but love Israel. And who gave an introduction? Sharansky gave an introduction, Herzog gave a video pre-taped introduction, so that Israel is now beginning to think, who are our friends on this planet? And these groups are now being looked at. And I would say I met through some connections that I have with Ayelet Shaked, the Israeli Minister of the Interior, a few months ago. And I raised my hand, oh, I'm president of this group, that da 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 da. She says, oh, I heard there were conversions in Nigeria. That was, got that one right. She said, oh, Israel will always accept converts. That was right. And then she said, but Israel doesn't want Africans. Okay, that's a quote. That's those three things, that's exactly how she said it. And so, but I said, that's very helpful. She heard there were conversions of Nigerians? Wow. Or then I met with Nachman Shai, who's the minister, was the minister of the diaspora. Okay, I raised my hand. Okay, I'm Bonita Sussman, blah, blah, blah. What are you doing with emerging Jewish communities? So he said, basically, we're putting, we see that we need to put money into social media for the young age group on college campuses to combat anti-Israel propaganda and stuff. But it's on my list. And I said, wow, it's on his list. That's an achievement. So it's moving there. You know, it's little step, that little step. And, you know, this is a good way for me to close. I want to say that Senator Herzl, he had a lot of detractors, right? He had to bang on a lot of doors to get people on his team. This was not a loved idea, setting up a Jewish state. And he knocked on doors and he got his team together. And look what happened in the end, even though even now we have some people who aren't on board with Herzl's plan. The fact is, historically, Herzl won the argument. And I really believe these groups, they don't need us. In time, they will win their own argument. We're just now helping the newspapers and media to get some awareness. But in the end, they're the righteous, and the righteous, you know, will have a final say. And I think that that's my feeling. And anybody else? Okay?
Thank you. On behalf of the Jewish Museum, I want to thank the Sussmans again for being here. And if you want more information, you can go to their website, which is kulanu.org. So thank you again for coming, and thank you to all of you who logged in on Zoom. Good night.